Ever wonder what happens when a French pharmacist walks into colonial Africa with nothing but medicine and ambition? I am a simple man. I want to live in peace. Black and White in Color wasn't just an Oscar-winning period piece. It was a searing indictment of colonial warfare wrapped in pitch-black comedy. From catastrophic location disasters to the film that predicted modern colonial critique, here are 20 weird facts about Black and White in Color. But stick around for the bonus fact. Because what happened at the Academy Awards ceremony changed French cinema forever. Let's dive in. Fact number 1. The director had never made a film before. Jean-Jacques Annaud was a commercial director when he tackled Black and White in Color. Not just his first feature film, but his first narrative project of any length. He'd spent years creating advertisements for French television, mastering visual storytelling in 30-second bursts. The leap to a 2-hour colonial satire seemed impossible. French producers initially rejected the project 17 times, citing Annaud's inexperience. What they didn't understand was that Annaud had studied every war film ever made. He'd dissected Kubrick, analyzed Renoir, memorized Eisenstein. His commercial work had taught him efficiency under pressure. When filming began in Cameroon, that pressure became suffocating. The debut director was about to learn that African locations don't forgive mistakes. Fact number 2. The entire production nearly died from heat exhaustion. Cameroon's equatorial climate attacked the French crew like a physical enemy. Temperatures soared past 105 degrees Fahrenheit daily. The humidity made breathing feel like drowning. Within the first week, 12 crew members collapsed from heat exhaustion and required medical evacuation. Annaud himself fainted twice while setting up shots. The camera equipment overheated constantly, forcing shooting schedules into narrow pre-dawn and late-evening windows. Film stock melted in its canisters. Makeup ran off actors' faces between takes. The production medic became the most important person on set, administering salt tablets and intravenous fluids like a battlefield surgeon. French insurance companies wanted to shut down production. Annaud refused. He'd come to Africa to show the brutality of colonial warfare. The heat was making his point for him. Fact number 3. Real African veterans refused to participate. Annaud wanted authentic African soldiers who'd actually experienced colonial military service. He found them, but they wanted nothing to do with his film. Veterans of French colonial regiments still living in Cameroon rejected the production outright when they learned the script's content. The film depicted African soldiers as cannon fodder for European squabbles. It showed the manipulation and exploitation these men had endured. Several veterans told Annaud they'd spent decades trying to forget those experiences. One former sergeant confronted the director publicly, calling the project opening old wounds for French entertainment. Annaud was devastated. He'd intended respect, not exploitation. The production scrambled to find actors willing to portray these complex roles. The rejection taught Annaud that some historical pain runs too deep for cinema to touch. Fact number 4. The script was based on true colonial insanity. The film's premise sounds absurd. French colonists in Africa declare war on their German neighbors during World War I, despite having no military training. But it actually happened. Writer Georges Chantant discovered the true story while researching colonial archives in Paris. Small colonial outposts across Africa erupted into their own private wars, mimicking the European conflict thousands of miles away. These weren't military operations, but deadly theater performed by civilians playing soldier. The French archive contained letters from a real pharmacist who'd tried to lead an attack, exactly like the film's protagonist. The correspondence revealed stunning incompetence mixed with genuine bloodshed. Chantant realized the truth was darker than any satire he could write. Reality had already created the perfect absurdist nightmare. Fact number 5. Catherine Rouvel nearly drowned during filming. The film's only major female character almost died for a 30-second scene. Catherine Rouvel played Mary Vaughan, the isolated Frenchwoman surrounded by colonial chaos. One sequence required her to cross a river while fleeing combat. The Cameroonian river looked peaceful during location scouting. On shooting day, recent rainfall had swollen it into a deadly current. Rouvel insisted on performing the stunt herself, refusing the double Annaud had arranged. Halfway across, the current grabbed her costume's heavy period dress. The fabric acted like an anchor, dragging her underwater. She disappeared beneath the surface for 12 terrifying seconds. 2 Cameroonian crew members dove in fully clothed, pulling her to safety. Rouvel emerged coughing water, then demanded they shoot the scene again immediately. Annaud cut the sequence from the film entirely. Fact number 6. The French government tried to block distribution. France's Ministry of Foreign Affairs attempted to bury black and white in color before its theatrical release. The ministry viewed the film as dangerous anti-French propaganda that could damage relationships with former African colonies. Internal memos described it as irresponsible revisionism that undermined France's historical narrative. Ministry officials contacted the film's distributor, applying pressure to limit the release to art house theaters only. They suggested the film might lose government funding opportunities in the future. Annaud learned about the interference through a journalist's investigation. The attempted censorship backfired spectacularly. French critics rallied around the film as an example of artistic freedom under threat. The controversy generated massive publicity. What the ministry feared most, they'd created: a film that forced France to confront its colonial brutality. Fact number 7. The Oscar win was a complete shock. Nobody at the Academy Award ceremony expected black and white in color to win anything. The film represented Ivory Coast, not France, in the Best Foreign Language Film category. This technicality confused American voters who assumed it was a French production. The other nominees included Fellini's Seven Beauties and Germany's Jacob the Liar, both from established masters. Black and white in color had barely been released in the United States. Trade publications didn't even list it among potential winners. When presenter Charlton Heston announced the title, the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion erupted in confused applause. Annaud was in Paris, convinced he had no chance. He learned about the win from a 3 a.m. phone call. The victory transformed his career instantly, but it also created a problem the Academy hadn't anticipated. Fact number 8. The Oscar belonged to the wrong country. The Academy Award for Black and White in Color went to Ivory Coast, but the film was entirely French. Ivory Coast had provided the Oscar submission because the film was shot in neighboring Cameroon and depicted colonial Africa. Not a single Ivorian was involved in production. France couldn't submit it because they'd already entered another film. The technicality allowed Annaud's debut to compete in a less crowded field. After the win, French officials demanded the Academy recognize it as a French achievement. Ivorian officials insisted the award belonged to African cinema. The dispute revealed uncomfortable truths about who gets to tell African stories. The Oscar sits in a museum in Abidjan, Ivory Coast, though every creative contributor was European. The controversy illustrated exactly what the film criticized: European control over African narratives. Fact number 9. Jean Carmet refused to learn his lines. The film's lead actor, Jean Carmet, drove Annaud to the edge of sanity with his unconventional method. Carmet played Hubert Fresnoy, the cowardly geographer thrust into military leadership. The acclaimed French character actor refused to memorize dialogue traditionally. He'd read the script once, absorbed the character's essence, then improvise everything on set. This created chaos for the multilingual production where precise timing mattered. Carmet's improvisations were brilliant but unpredictable. Other actors struggled to respond naturally to lines they'd never heard before. Annaud shot every scene multiple times trying to capture usable takes. The process devoured film stock and production time. Yet Carmet's spontaneous performance became the film's emotional core. His fumbling, desperate attempt to maintain dignity while everything collapses feels devastatingly real because it was created in the moment. Fact number 10. The battle scenes used real ammunition. Go ahead and like and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you explains why modern film safety regulations exist. Annaud's battle sequences employed live ammunition to achieve authentic muzzle flashes and recoil. This wasn't unusual for 1970s European productions, where safety standards were dangerously lax. Cameroonian military advisors supervised the weapons, loading vintage rifles with reduced powder charges. The sound design team wanted real gunfire rather than post-production effects. Actors fired actual bullets during combat scenes, aiming carefully away from crew and cast members. The practice worked until it didn't. During one sequence, a rifle malfunction sent a round ricocheting off a rock near Jacques Annaud's head. The bullet missed by approximately 6 inches. Production immediately switched to blanks for close-ups, but wide shots in the final film show real ammunition destroying the African landscape. The reckless decision created stunning realism, but could have ended with tragedy. Fact number 11. The film's budget was smaller than a TV episode. Black and white in color cost less than $350,000 to produce, microscopic even by 1976 standards. American television episodes commanded larger budgets. Annaud stretched every franc through desperate creativity. The period costumes came from a Paris theater company going out of business. The weapons were borrowed from a military museum. Location fees in Cameroon were minimal because the government wanted to promote local filmmaking. The tiny budget meant no safety nets. Every shot had to work because they couldn't afford reshoots. Actors wore the same costumes repeatedly because there were no backups. The financial constraints created accidental brilliance. The film's intimate, claustrophobic feeling wasn't just artistic choice, but economic necessity. The small scale made the colonial outpost feel authentically isolated and desperate. Fact number 12. Jacques Dufilio's character was based on a real priest. The morphine-using missionary priest Rechabur existed in historical records. Georges Chantant discovered correspondence from a Catholic priest stationed in French Equatorial Africa during World War I. The real priest had developed a dependency on medical supplies intended for his parishioners. His letters described the psychological collapse of isolated colonial officials watching European civilization destroy itself. The priest had written, "We pretend civilization here while Europe proves we have none." That sentence became the film's thematic foundation. Jacques Dufilio studied the historical letters obsessively, understanding that addiction wasn't the character's defining trait. The priest's problem was seeing clearly in a situation where delusion was necessary for survival. Dufilio played the role with devastating compassion, showing a man who'd lost faith in everything except chemical escape. Fact number 13. The score was recorded in a single day. Composer Pierre Bachelet had exactly 12 hours to record the entire musical score in a Paris studio. Budget constraints allowed no additional time. Bachelet arrived with fully orchestrated arrangements, every note planned precisely. The 30-piece orchestra ran through each cue twice maximum before recording. There was no time for experimentation or revision. The musicians sight-read Bachelet's charts, capturing the melancholy colonial atmosphere in first takes. The score's haunting simplicity wasn't minimalist aesthetic, but economic reality. Bachelet couldn't afford complex arrangements or multiple recording sessions. The time pressure created an unpolished, emotionally raw soundtrack that perfectly matched the film's desperate tone. Critics praised the music's restraint without knowing it was financial constraint. The score's effectiveness proved that limitations often produce better art than unlimited resources. Fact number 14. The film was rejected by every major festival. Cannes, Venice, and Berlin all passed on black and white in color before its release. Festival programmers found the film too dark, too political, too critical of European colonialism. One rejection letter called it relentlessly unpleasant. The Cannes Selection Committee specifically noted that French audiences weren't ready for such harsh colonial critique. Annaud was crushed by the rejections. Without festival exposure, the film seemed destined for obscurity. A small distributor finally agreed to a limited Paris release, expecting minimal returns. The film opened in 3 theaters with almost no publicity. Critics discovered it accidentally and began writing passionate reviews. Word spread through intellectual circles. The festival rejections that seemed like death sentences became proof of the film's challenging honesty. Sometimes being too uncomfortable for festivals means being too honest for comfort. Fact number 15. The title caused translation disasters. Black and white in color was originally noir et blancs en couleur in French. The English title flattens a multi-layered pun. The French title refers to both racial categories and the fact that it's a color film about people usually depicted in black and white photography. It also suggests bringing color to the black and white moral simplicity of colonial narratives. German distributors titled it Der Krieg der Götter, the War of the Gods, completely missing the point. Spanish distributors went with La Victoria en Chantant, victory through singing, referencing a minor musical moment. Italian distributors called it Bianchi e Neri e Colori, a literal translation that lost all nuance. Each language struggled with Chantant's clever wordplay about perception and reality. The translation problems reflected the film's core theme, how European languages couldn't adequately describe African experiences. Fact number 16. The ending was reshot 3 times. Annaud couldn't decide how to conclude the film's moral argument. The first ending showed French colonists celebrating victory, completely unaware they'd learned nothing. Test audiences found it too cynical. The second ending added a scene of African soldiers walking away from their European commanders, suggesting resistance. French censors demanded it be removed as politically inflammatory. The third ending, which appears in the final cut, shows everyone returning to meaningless colonial routine after pointless violence. The ambiguity satisfied neither censors nor test audiences, but Annaud believed it reflected historical truth. Colonialism didn't end with dramatic revelation, but continued despite its obvious brutality. The unsatisfying conclusion was the most honest one. History doesn't provide neat moral resolutions. The reshot endings consumed the last of the production budget. Fact number 17. African crew members weren't credited. Despite employing dozens of Cameroonian crew members, the film's credits list almost exclusively French names. This wasn't unusual for 1970s productions, but remains deeply problematic. Cameroonian location scouts found every shooting site. Local fixers solved constant logistical nightmares. African technical assistants kept equipment functional in impossible conditions. None received screen credit. The oversight reflected exactly what the film criticized: European narratives of Africa that erase African contributions. Annaud later expressed deep regret about the credits, calling it his biggest professional failure. He'd made a film attacking colonial exploitation while unconsciously perpetuating it behind the scenes. Several Cameroonian crew members have been identified through research, but the film's official record remains unchanged. The contradiction reveals how colonial thinking persists even in anti-colonial art. Fact number 18. The film predicted modern colonial critique. When Black and White in Color premiered, French intellectuals dismissed it as exaggerated satire. 40 years later, historians confirmed Annaud and Chantant had understated colonial brutality. The film's depiction of casual violence, economic exploitation, and psychological manipulation matched historical records exactly. Academic research revealed that small colonial wars were even more absurd and deadly than the film portrayed. The supposedly satirical elements were documentary accuracy. Modern historians use the film in courses about colonial Africa because it captures essential truths other period films miss. The comedy isn't exaggeration, but the only way to process historical horror. Annaud's instinct to treat colonial warfare as darkly absurd theater proved more insightful than serious historical dramas. The film's reputation transformed from controversial satire to essential historical document. Fact number 19. It launched one of cinema's greatest careers. Jean-Jacques Annaud directed Quest for Fire, The Name of the Rose, The Bear, 7 Years in Tibet, and Enemy at the Gates after this debut. Every major film explored human nature under extreme conditions, continuing themes from Black and White in Color. The Oscar win gave him creative freedom most directors never achieve. Studios trusted him with massive budgets for ambitious projects, yet Annaud consistently said his debut remained his most important film. The later blockbusters made him wealthy and famous, but the colonial satire defined his artistic worldview. He'd started his career examining how civilization collapses under pressure. Every subsequent film explored the same question with bigger budgets and stars. The tiny African production that almost killed him established the template for one of international cinema's most fascinating careers. Fact number 20. The film was banned in several African nations. Multiple post-colonial African governments prohibited Black and White in Color from theatrical release. The reasons varied, but centered on how the film depicted African characters. Some officials believed it reinforced stereotypes of Africans as passive victims of European conflict. Others objected to African soldiers being shown following foolish European orders. The film's savage critique of colonialism didn't excuse these concerns. African audiences deserved stories where they were subjects, not objects of European narratives. The bans revealed the film's central contradiction. It attacked colonialism while maintaining a European perspective. Annaud struggled with this criticism, unable to fully answer it. The film opposed colonial brutality, but couldn't escape its own European gaze. The bans weren't censorship, but legitimate objection to whose stories get told and how. Even anti-colonial films can perpetuate colonial dynamics. Bonus fact: the Oscar statuette was stolen and held for ransom. 3 months after the Academy Awards ceremony, someone broke into the Ivorian Cultural Ministry office in Abidjan and stole the Oscar statuette. The thief demanded 50,000 francs ransom and threatened to melt down the award. Ivorian officials refused to pay, calling it extortion. The thief sent photographs of the Oscar to newspapers, proving possession. For 6 weeks, Ivory Coast's only Academy Award was missing. French newspapers covered the story with barely concealed amusement, noting the irony of Africa's Oscar being stolen. The police investigation went nowhere until an anonymous tip revealed the thief's location. Officers recovered the statuette undamaged from a storage unit in downtown Abidjan. The thief was never identified or charged. The Oscar was placed in a secure museum with upgraded security. The bizarre kidnapping became another layer of the film's strange legacy. Black and White in Color remains cinema's most unlikely Oscar winner. A debut film shot for nothing in brutal conditions, depicting European colonialism's absurd cruelty, representing a country that didn't make it. The film that almost died from heat exhaustion, live ammunition, and bureaucratic interference became a historical document. About forgotten colonial warfare, Annaud's career exploded, but he never recaptured this film's raw honesty. Sometimes the cheapest productions create the most expensive truths. If you learned something weird today, smash that like button and subscribe for more film history nobody teaches in school. Because cinema's greatest stories often happen off-screen.